Chairman, the live stream is now running.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Excuse me. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Constitution and Governance Committee. Before consideration of today's business, I will, as usual, outline the protocols for the meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed to the public via Microsoft Teams and is also being recorded. May I remind members and officers to introduce yourselves each time you speak and to turn your video and microphone off when you've finished speaking. If the Council's live stream fails during the meeting and we cannot share the proceedings, I will adjourn the meeting so that access can be restored.
and we can
Yep.
resume within a few minutes. I'll speak to our live stream operator.
Okay, so I suggest that we start the roll call again once we're back in session.
Yes, Chairman.
Leah, or Mel, if it doesn't work, what do we do?
If it doesn't work, members can't be seen and be heard, but we have had this before and we've made it work, so I'm sure we'll get it working.
So everybody's fingers crossed at this point.
Yeah.
We're back on.
So what I suggest we do, Chairman, is that we just wait for Debbie to return to the call, and then what Debbie can do is confirm who proposed and who seconded on that item, and we can just if you just give me 1 second, Chairman. So I think, Chairman, yeah, we can just confirm that there were no declarations of interest at the start of this meeting, no apologies for absence, and then I suggest we
Chairman, the live stream has resumed.
Okay, and I make it 11:15, so hopefully everyone is back and we can resume the meeting. My apologies to anybody who is watching, but we've had some technical issues this morning with the live stream. I will just explain what we've done so far. So there were no apologies for absence on the agenda, there were no declarations of interest, and there were no comments on the minutes, and therefore the minutes have been proposed and seconded as a true record, and the Democratic and Governance Officer will now take a roll call on that proposal of item 3 on the agenda. Over to you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chairman. So it has been moved by Councillor Wills, seconded by Councillor Towell, that the minutes be approved as a correct record. So if I can go to the vote, Councillor Biggs.
4.
Councillor Brown.
4.
Councillor Eddy.
4.
Councillor Ecking-Smith.
4.
Councillor French.
4.
Councillor Pascoe.
4.
Councillor Pollard.
4.
Councillor Towell.
4.
Councillor Wills.
4.
Councillor Wood, are you on the call? He will be joining us later this morning, Chairman. So the minutes of the meeting have been approved unanimously as a correct record.
That's great. Thank you very much. Third time lucky. And thank you for members for your patience. Okay, so we move now directly into item 4 on the agenda, composition in terms of reference of the Standards Committee. The recommendation is on page 7, and I think Simon Mansell is going to talk to this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members. Just a little bit about the report. For those members that may not be aware, I've set out the history of the Standards Committee as it currently exists at Cornwall Council in the first few paragraphs under section 2, and then explain some of the rationale behind the first recommendation, which is keeping the size and the composition of the Standards Committee the same. Part of this is that there is only 8 Cornwall councillors on the Standards Committee at this time. And secondly, there is an expected increase in the workload of the Standards Committee once the changes to the ethical standards regime are made and suspensions are reintroduced. It is likely, but we don't know for sure yet, there will be need to reintroduce hearing subcommittees, and because of this will therefore increase the workload quite considerably at the Standards Committee, with perhaps 10 to 12 hearing subcommittees each year. On the second part of the recommendation, this turns to the functions and responsibilities of the Standards Committee. These have been amended slightly over the years. However, the recommendations before the committee deal with the actual terminology used, because the local government ombudsman is now the local government and social care ombudsman, and that therefore brings the wording into line with the name of the body that the Standards Committee reports to and deals with. It's really just a change to make sure the terminology is correct. It doesn't change the actual work of the committee. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions on the report as is before members.
Great, thank you, Simon. Councillor Paul Wills is the chairman of the Standards Committee. Paul, are you?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Would you like to make some comment at this point? I know you've been consulted on this.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the work of the Standards Committee, of course, is well known throughout Cornwall Council. We are held up by the Parliamentary Committee on Standards in Public Life as an example of how ethical standards regimes and other parts of the work of the committee should be done throughout the country. Over the last 3.5 years, it's been my honour and privilege to chair the Standards Committee. The recommendations before the committee, the Constitution and Governance Committee today, as explained by the Corporate Governance Manager, are pretty self-explanatory, and I hope that members will consider voting favourably for the recommendations in front of them, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Paul, many thanks for that. Any comments from members, please? X in the box. Mr. Councillor Biggs.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just thank you for the report, Mr. Mansell. I just wonder, the only thing that sort of does concern me a little is the ratios of councillors on the committee, and perhaps I could take some advice on this. 8 members of Cornwall Council represents 10% of the membership, which does seem a little bit on the heavy side. Of course, we still have 2,500 town and parish councillors, which is probably the issue. Would it be fair to say that we ought to be looking at kind of readjusting the ratio so that there are more town and parish councillors and perhaps a couple less Cornwall councillors? What will your view on that be, please?
Thank you for the question. It's something that has been considered by the Standards Committee and Council in the past. At the moment, the issue is that only Cornwall councillors can vote on the Standards Committee because of the changes that were brought about by the Localism Act. It removed the right for the town and parish councillors and the lay members to vote. Now, central government has said that as part of the changes to the ethical standards regime, they intend to reintroduce the right to vote for town and parish councillors. If that is done, then the balance could be redressed. But until we get confirmation of that, you're having only the 8 voting members, and then the need for a quorum. If it's reduced further, then it could make it difficult at times to have a quorum and have enough voting members when people have declared interest, as sometimes they do, leave the chamber for other matters, etc.
Can I come back, Dave?
No, that makes sense, and I understand that. So thank you very much for that. Yeah,
okay, I think Simon, I'm right in saying that things are changing again in the standards world, and therefore really you're just trying to stay as ahead of the game as you can.
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. We're just trying to tread water at the moment, as it were, for want of a better word, until such time as the changes are confirmed by central government.
Okay, great. So, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I've had a number of dealings with the standards regime over the last few years, and bearing in mind the limited numbers of officers available for this work, I've found them invariably helpful, open, and willing to give good advice to anybody. I'm pleased that Simon has explained the rationale for the proportion of Cornwall councillors as opposed to parish councillors. One question I have is, are parish councillors subject to the same degree of training as the Cornwall councillors on the committee? I suppose my second point is, and you've already referred to this, John, as from the chair, that there is this work which is being done by the Local Government Association, and I'm assuming that when that is finalised, there'll be sort of more substantial changes to the way that the standards regime works, and in a sense we're almost sort of marking time for the moment before the next council presumably will do more work on it. So I just wanted that impression to be confirmed. The other thing is, I just want to make a general comment, because I'm not sure we're entitled today to comment on how the standards committee works, but while I endorse the general comments about how well it operates, I have in recent times expressed a number of concerns raised by members of the Liberal Democrat group. One of which I think is relevant, is that we do still publish in a public document the results of investigations which have been undertaken even after they've been dismissed, i.e. an allegation about bad practice on the part of a councillor, whether a Cornwall councillor or a parish councillor, is brought into the public domain after it's been concluded as not to be justified. Now, I know at a recent standards committee, a document was withdrawn after it was published, and another document, I think, was then published in its place. And I was just wondering if there are any thoughts at the moment, if you like, about the balance between total transparency, even where it relates to history, and the right of members to feel that if they've been wrongly criticised, it's not necessarily in the public interest for that to go further than necessary.
If I could take the last point first, Mr. Chairman, and then sort of work backwards through that. In terms of the publication of details, the issue that arose for the last meeting of the Standards Committee was that complaints had been withdrawn and then not processed at all. And the member concerned raised a question with us as to whether we should be publishing if withdrawn complaints should be published. Now, it's something that we have always done since Cornwall Council was formed, but after further discussion and taking, sounding from peers as well across the country, it was decided that any complaint that was withdrawn would be marked as withdrawn on the spreadsheet, so therefore it would not show in the public domain that that complaint had not gone forwards. In terms of publishing decided matters, this again is something we've always done, whether there's a breach or not. It does help, we think, showing if there's been no breach of the code of conduct to publish the matter, because that puts the decision notice relating to the matter into the public domain. It shows the reasoning behind finding no breach, and then also prevents people from saying, well, what happened to that? There was no breach, but why was there no breach? It also is in line with the Committee on Standards in Public Life's recommendations that council should publish their decision notices online. About 75–80% do, but some don't, and their recommendation that all should publish these notices to ensure that transparency. In terms of the future of the committee, Councillor Brown, you're right, we are just marking time for the time being. It's something that once we know what statutory changes are pending, and we keep getting promised them by central government, and they haven't emerged as yet, but once we know what statutory changes are pending, then we can sit down and we can give the committee some sort of surety about where the work is going, and then what the composition and of the standards committee should be. On the issue of training, we would always encourage all town and parish councillors to receive training on the standards committee, but if they don't receive it prior to joining the committee, then we make sure that training is given once they join the standards committee, and code of conduct training is run either within a group or individually for new members of the standards committee as may be needed. Does that answer your questions?
Malcolm?
Yeah, yes, it does. And I also give Simon full marks, which officers don't always get. That when rotten councillors like me ask loads of questions, that they actually remember them all and answer them all.
There are a
Thank
star, Mr. Mansell. A star. Okay. Anyone else, please? Okay, then would somebody like to propose the recommendations on page 7?
Happy to propose, Chairman. Councillor Eddy.
Thank you, Councillor Eddy. Is there a seconder, please?
Yes, Dave Biggs, I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Biggs. So, Debbie, I think you'll read the long recommendation, will you? And then go to a roll call, please.
Yes, Chairman, I will. So the recommendations have been moved by Councillor Eddy and seconded by Councillor Biggs, that the size and composition of the Standards Committee for the new council following the election in 2021 remains as currently, i.e. 8 Cornwall councillors, 5 town and parish representatives and 5 lay members. And also that it be recommended to council that the following paragraphs of the functions and responsibilities for the Standards Committee are amended with immediate effect as follows. 1. 15K to conduct periodic reviews of complaints considered by the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman, including the outcome of any investigations in which maladministration and injustice have been found, and where appropriate to make recommendations regarding the handling of such complaints by the council. 2. 15L to receive and review the annual report of the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman before forwarding the report to council with committee's recommendations. And 3. 15N to exercise the power to make payments or otherwise make settlements where maladministration has been found by the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman, which power is further delegated to the monitoring officer. So if we could take a roll call. Councillor Biggs.
4.
Councillor Brown.
4.
Councillor Eddy.
4.
Councillor Ecking-Smith.
4.
Councillor French.
4.
Councillor Pascoe.
4.
Councillor Pollard,
4.
Councillor Towell,
4.
Councillor Wills
4.
and Councillor Wood.
4.
Thank you, Chairman. That recommendation has been agreed unanimously, and I can also confirm that Councillor Wood rejoined the meeting at 10:15 this morning, Chairman.
Great, welcome John, and thank you for that, and thank you members, and thank you Simon, and indeed Paul. Obviously a very clear piece of work, and that now goes to full council presumably for acceptance. Okay, right, so we move on to number 4. No, we don't. No, number 5, a review of the scheme of delegation. Welcome, Leo. If you'd like to introduce yourself and take it away, please.
Good morning, members. I'm Leah Musto-Shinton, Senior Corporate Governance Lawyer. My report's found at pages 15 to 29 of your agenda pack. So I was asked to review the scheme of delegation. This was last reviewed in September 2018. And that review was a detailed review where many changes were made. So due to this, my review has only led to minimal changes being proposed. I asked the committee that they recommend to full council that my proposed changes, which is shown by way of track changes in Appendix 1 to the report, be approved. So if I take you firstly to paragraph 2.2 of my report, which is page 16 in the agenda pack, here I set out what we currently have in place. So within our constitution, we have a scheme of delegation which provides broad executive and non-executive decision-making authority to strategic directors in respect of functions which fall within the responsibility of their directorate, and also to the service director for planning and sustainable development in respect of planning and control matters. And it's made clear that with some certain explicit exceptions that the chief executive is also able to exercise the power of these officers. The scheme of delegation expressly provides these officers with the ability to onward delegate their decision-making authority to other officers. And this year I've done a large piece of work within all of the directorates to establish a detailed set of onward delegations for each directorate. And within my report, it's section 4, I do attach a link to these. These are kept on the council's website, and they just make very clear to members, the public and officers, which officers have authority to take which decisions. So that's what we currently have in place. So just moving on to my proposed changes. So they're set out at paragraphs 2.3 to 2.6 of my report. And they're also shown by way of track changes in the appendix to the report. So my first proposed change is to insert a new paragraph 1.3 and 1.4. And that's to make it clear that other named officers, such as the chief executive and the service director, assurance, set out in the scheme of delegation, and not just the strategic directors and the service director for planning and sustainable development, have to adhere to the principles of decision making set out in the scheme. So that wasn't explicitly clear before, and those principles are things such as consultation with relevant members and other relevant officers, and also decisions to be taken within budget and policy framework. So that's the first proposed change. The second proposed change is to insert a new paragraph 1.5, and that's to make reference to statutory and proper officers, which is omitted at the moment in our constitution and scheme of delegation. And that's to make it clear that although they get their authority directly from statute and not from the scheme of delegation itself, that in respect of when they take decisions, those same principles of decision making set out in the scheme apply to decisions taken by them. And I just point out in my report there that there will be a bigger piece of work undertaken in the new year to set out in the constitution all of the council's statutory and proper officers and their functions. obvious ones are the monitoring officer and the section 151 officer, but there are more obscure officers such as weights and measures chief. I did notice actually when I was reviewing this that in my track changes in the new paragraph 1.5, I would like to change where I make reference to statutory officers. It should say statutory and proper officers. So that occurs twice in the new proposed paragraph 1.5. So if I could just make that clear. My next proposed change is to insert a new paragraph, insert new text within paragraph 1.9, and that's to make it clear that the ability to onward delegate the authority to make decisions applies to all officers who confer powers from the scheme of delegation. So, for example, the Chief Executive and the Service Director for Assurance. Currently, it's not explicitly clear, with reference only being made to Strategic Directors and Service Director for Planning and Sustainable Development. And my last proposed change is just through passage of time, it's to replace a reference to an out-of-date post title. So I've redrafted that in a way that survives future post title changes. So they are the proposed changes. In terms of process, following consideration by this committee, the recommendation would need approval by full council. Once this is given approval, we would also seek from the leader his approval in respect of the changes to the scheme of delegation, which relate to executive functions. And I have discussed this paper with him and he is happy with the recommendation and with the approach taken. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Leah. So am I right in saying that, I mean, obviously you've gone through it thoroughly and in detail, but these are tweaks for accuracy rather than major changes to the scheme of delegation?
They are. They're essentially to make things explicitly clear where they're not, and to make an express reference to statutory and proper officers, which is currently not within the Constitution. And that will be followed up by a bigger piece of work, as I say. Excellent.
Councillor Biggs.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the report. I just wonder, you were asked to undertake this work. I'm not sure where that request came from. It just seemed to me that there was a very heavy emphasis on the planning and development side of the powers. That may be by accident rather than design. And I understand certainly the issue about the forward delegation from the chief executive down. I mean, that's common sense, and I think that's absolutely right. Could I just, that was just kind of wrong. So could I just make one point at the bottom of page 19, 1.7, without prejudice to these delegations, an officer is expected to have regard to any resolution of the council, the cabinet, relevant portfolio holder, or overview and scrutiny committee. Could I take exception to that? Because overview and scrutiny committees do not make resolutions; they only make recommendations, and they cannot resolve to do anything. And I think that they should be omitted from that. Would you take that as a point?
Can you repeat the paragraph, please, Dave?
Yeah, it's at the bottom of page 19. It's now 1.7, I believe.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you can't. I said overview scrutiny committees do not resolve anything. They do not have the powers to resolve anything.
I take that point, Councillor Biggs. We can omit that from the paragraph. That was something obviously that was in previously. We could either omit the overview and scrutiny committee. In fact, I think it is correct to omit it, because if you try to change it to say recommendations made, I think that gets very difficult, because they then may not be followed through. So I think it's correct to omit it.
Yeah, I agree. I think they should be omitted from that. I said I was a little critical. It just struck me about this heavy emphasis on the planning and development officers. Just worried me slightly that we were forcing the delegation down the chain of command and to what ends I wasn't quite sure. That's just a worry that. And can I just add a further point, Chairman, if I may? Whilst you were having you were doing this work, the one area where I thought we might have actually been looking at a change to the delegation was from paragraph 12 on, action in case of emergency or disaster. Now, this is still exactly the same as it always was, and we've just been through the pandemic and we've actually exercised emergency powers, and I'm not sure that we've actually learnt the lessons or incorporated anything in there, because again, these emergency powers really relate to a single event at a point in time, and not the pandemic ongoing that we've had. And I just thought that there was probably a case for us to have just a bit of a review of what's happened in the pandemic, so that we actually could frame. We may never ever have a pandemic ever again, but the Constitution should now be cognizant of the fact that we have been through it and learn the lessons from it. And I don't think we've done that. So I think there's a bit of an opportunity missed if we don't do that.
I think that's a very valid, sorry, Chairman.
Oh, go on.
I think that's a very valid point, but there is on the committee's work programme a further review of the temporary variations. So currently we do have a temporary variation to those emergency and disaster powers to accommodate the pandemic, and I think that work will come forward following the further review of the temporary variations. So I don't think that is something that has been forgotten. It is on the work programme and will be looked at again.
Mel wants to come in a minute. Leah, please.
Yeah, so good morning, members, and apologies, I don't know if I've done this given our technical issues, but my name's Melanie O'Sullivan and I'm the Service Director for Assurance and Monitoring Officer. So Councillor Bigg, thank you for raising those issues with us. Just a couple of points from my perspective. So in relation to the reference around the delegations to planning, I think that's totally appropriate in these circumstances. And one of the pieces of work that I'm sure Leah will be happy to explain that we've done is we've actually got a scheme of delegation that sits beneath this now for all of our strategic directors, and that is available on the council website along with our constitution, so you can see for each strategic director what delegations they've got in place for their service directors and heads of service going down. So I think that detailed work supports that. You wouldn't expect to see that detailed work within your constitutional provisions, but it's a helpful supporting document that is available on Cornwall Council's website. Just in relation to the urgency procedures and the use of those through the pandemic, I did just want to reference as well to the point that Leah has made, just to make you aware that there was audit work undertaken in relation to the actions around the pandemic, and one was in relation to decision making, and that has been reported back to the audit committee, and we were given reasonable assurance around the steps we took in relation to our decision making during the pandemic. So we will pick it up as part of the temporary variations, but I am confident that as an authority that we have done that review of those urgency provisions. And I have to say, and I can't take credit for this, but the Constitution was drafted in a very helpful way that meant that we could react a lot quicker than other authorities. So I think that there is a positive from that, but we will of course bring back the temporary variation review as Leah has confirmed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Leah, do you want to add anything?
No.
Okay. David, you okay?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. If I just could respond just very briefly. Yeah, I take on board the points that Mr. Sullivan's made, and I was not being critical of what was done during the pandemic or even the Constitution. It just always occurred to me that it was the return to normal situation was not explicit for me in the Constitution, and I thought it should be, and that's the area that I would like to see.
Okay. Well, I think that's noted, Mel, isn't it? But I think as far as you're concerned, we don't need to do that at this point.
I think in terms of so I think there was, I guess, the early learning from it, there was some confusion around declaring a major incident and the use of urgency powers, and as Councillor Biggs has said, when those urgency powers ended, I think it's something that we can pick up as a review of the temporary variations, as we said in later report.
Okay, Okay, so my understanding, Dave, is this will all come back to us, hopefully, before the end of this council. And then I think in the light of the action on the pandemic and the emergency measures that are in place from the government, or the rules that have been laid down by the government, we could then make a change if necessary, perhaps. Okay. Okay, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I wasn't going to speak on this, but I've been thinking about Councillor Biggs's initial point about removing the words overview and scrutiny committee in 1.7, and I must admit, the more I think about it, the more I think that's wrong, and I hope officers aren't accepting that, because if you read what it says after overview and scrutiny, it says on any matter of principle or policy. Now, any matter of policy isn't exclusively making policy. I would have thought an overview and scrutiny committee can pass a resolution to ask the cabinet to review the council's policy on X, Y or Z. Now that is a resolution on a matter of principle or policy. So I don't see the advantage of taking the words overview and scrutiny committee out. I think also we all know that lots of members are absolutely paranoid about what they see as the limited powers that overview and scrutiny committees have anyway. And I think if we were seen to be taking reference to them out of this clause, I think there would be likely to be a revolt when this gets to council. So I would have thought it would be better to leave it as it is.
Thank you, Malcolm. Can I just add, I think the word that David is disputing is resolution. And perhaps if we just added a different word, because we can resolve to take action, or we can resolve to make comment, or it's overview and scrutiny can resolve to make comment. What they can't resolve is a decision. Is that the point, David?
Absolutely, Chairman. Yes, scrutiny committees do not resolve anything.
Well, no, in many senses they don't, but they do resolve to do things, don't they? They do resolve to have another report. They do resolve to make a comment. They do resolve to object.
No, I disagree with you, John. No,
okay.
They make recommendations.
Okay.
A resolution is an action. An affirmative action for which you have power to act, but the overview scrutiny committees do not do that. They can only recommend.
I do think, looking at the drafting of that paragraph, that the intention there is talking about resolutions as in decisions, because I think it would be very difficult for an officer to take into account when making a delegated decision recommendations made by an overview and scrutiny committee which weren't then followed through by the ultimate decision maker, because they could find themselves in conflict trying to both take into consideration something that was recommended by an overview and scrutiny committee, which then may go to cabinet, and cabinet may make a different decision. So I do think the intent in the drafting of that paragraph is talking about a resolution as in a decision. And so taking on board Councillor Biggs' views and also Councillor Brown's, I still think it would probably read better to remove reference to overview and scrutiny.
Okay, but I think Malcolm needs the assurance that this isn't taking, which it isn't, any power away from overview and scrutiny. Is that right, Malcolm?
Yeah. I think somebody also ought to have a look at a dictionary, because I don't think Councillor Biggs may be technically right, although I don't think he's even that. But I just don't think this corresponds with common sense use of a word like resolve.
May I come back, Chairman?
Well, you may, but I have to admit that's my view, that I think we do resolve to do things in scrutiny. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, thank you. If you look at, say, for instance, West Planning yesterday, the wording in the minutes is that we resolve, and that's an affirmative action. And if you just take, for instance, if you allow this to go forward as it is, you could have a resolution from cabinet and a different recommendation from overview scrutiny, which we've already had. So in terms of, well, we've just already seen it quite recently, where customer support services have made one recommendation, Cabinet have not accepted it and gone with a totally different resolution. So it's rife for conflict, and it doesn't need to be.
Okay, well, I take that point, but I think I'm a bit with Malcolm in that I think we are now arguing over the application of the meaning of the word to resolve, or the verb to resolve, but we won't go down there. Okay, so Leah is content.
Chairman Melanie O'Sullivan wishes
Oh,
to come
sorry,
in.
missed that, Mel. Sorry, go on.
Not a problem, Chairman. So just wanted to pass comment on what's been said, and in a way, both members are right in some of their assertions. So Councillor Biggs is correct that as a matter of pure governance, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee cannot resolve. So the key point here is that we do need to change paragraph 1.7 because it's factually inaccurate in terms of what it says. However, there may be circumstances where an officer is making a decision following the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. So once an Overview and Scrutiny Committee is met, it could be referred to a portfolio holder for decision, a strategic director for decision, or cabinet for decision. And I think to give Malcolm Brown, Councillor Brown, that protection that he perhaps need, we do need to recognise that scenario within paragraph 1.7. And it would be only right then that if a officer was making a decision following an Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, that they must have regard to that decision, because that is what cabinet would do and that is what the portfolio holder would do. So I think in my conclusions, I agree with Councillor Biggs that we can't make reference to resolution and Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and therefore that needs to come out. And I think we need to add an additional sentence that says where an officer is taking a decision following an Overview and Scrutiny Committee process, that regard must be had to the outcome of that meeting. And hopefully Councillor Biggs and Councillor Brown can support that proposal.
I have to say, Mr. O'Sullivan, that's diplomacy of the highest order.
It's Christmas, Chairman.
Okay, so that is a proposal to leave it to the officers to amend that paragraph in line of Mel's explanation. Hopefully, Councillor Biggs and Councillor Brown are going to make comment of a positive nature on that.
Yeah,
Councillor Brown, go.
Sorry, yeah, I was going to suggest that we recommend to the government that they invite Mrs. O'Sullivan to take the place of Mr. Johnson in sorting out the Brexit process.
I couldn't possibly comment. Councillor Biggs.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I fully accept that.
Okay, so back to you, Leah, and thank you, Mel, for that clarification. Leah, you're content with that?
Yes, I'm content with that. I can redraft that paragraph so it fits both situations.
Excellent. So do we have any other comments from members, please? Okay, I've got no more X's in the box. So the resolution is another one to council, recommendation to council, and it's fairly succinct, but I'll go down to Debbie to read the proposal and to take a roll call on item 5.
Thank you, Chairman. So the recommendation, subject to the changes to paragraphs 1.5.
Chairman, who's proposing? And sorry, who's proposing? Who's seconding?
Oh, I'm
Chairman,
sorry.
I was just going to read the recommendation and then invite a proposer and seconder, if that's fine, Chairman.
Thank you.
So the recommendation is subject to the changes in paragraphs 1.5 and 1.7, that council be recommended to approve the proposed changes to the scheme of delegation set out in section 5 of the council's constitution and attached as appendix 1 to the report. And could I have the proposer and seconder, please?
I'll propose.
Thank you. Seconder.
Second.
Councillor Biggs. Thank you very much. So if we could go to the roll call, please, members. Councillor Biggs.
4.
Councillor Brown.
4.
Councillor Eddy.
4.
Councillor Ecking-Smith,
For.
Councillor French,
For.
Councillor Pascoe,
For.
Councillor Pollard,
For.
Councillor Towell,
For.
Councillor Wills,
4.
and Councillor Wood.
For.
Thank you. That recommendation is unanimously agreed for consideration by Council Chairman.
Great, thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Leah.
Thank you.
Right, we go on to item 6, a review of the Informal Investment Programme Panel, the IIPP. And I think we've got Rachel Rotherham and Sharon Hamilton dealing with this. Is it over to you, Rachel?
It is indeed, Chair, yes.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So firstly, good morning, members. I'm Rachel Rotherham and I'm the Head of Commercial and Investments. Sharon, unfortunately, is not here today, so I will be covering this item. So just to give an overview of the report, the IIPP was established in 2018 and as you're probably aware, it is part of the governance of the investment programme of the Council and has a critical relationship in terms of our management of the interface with Treveth. And essentially it sits on the Cornwall Council side, involving members to overview effectively business cases which are brought forward from IPAG and has overview of the performance effectively of the wider investment programme. When it was originally established, there was agreement to come back to Constitution and Governance in 12 months to review its progress and its performance. But Treveth had only just been established and that was deemed to be too soon. Very recently, there have been a number of critical things that have happened that make effectively this wider review necessary, and I just want to cover off what those are. Firstly, the Council recently had a detailed audit undertaken by Grant Thornton of the review of the investment programme and of Treveth. And the overall review was really positive, but they did make a series of recommendations, of which one of those was effectively to review the governance. The comments specifically around the review are covered in the main report, but essentially Grant Thornton made comments that they thought that the governance could be strengthened to make sure we got a better balance around effectively challenge and scrutiny, but also not stifling effectively the ability of the LLP or Treveth effectively to undertake its business. Secondly, which you're probably aware, there have been a number of recent reviews or public interest reports, both in Croydon and in Nottinghamshire, the latter involving effectively council-owned companies that make a series of recommendations around financial management and also governance. And I think, again, Grant Thornton commented that it was important that we considered effectively the outcome of those recommendations. Thirdly, since the creation of IIPP, we have obviously now established effectively the wider governance around Treveth that wasn't in place at that point, and that includes obviously the creation of the new Treveth board or project committee in LLP speak, which includes effectively representatives who have real specialisms in management of effectively the business of the IIPP. Grant Thornton's review identified that any review of IIPP should not take place in isolation, but should be considered as part of the wider governance of both the investment programme and also of Treveth, and I think that that is right. The report sets out what we're recommending in terms of the process of the review, so I don't really want to cover that in detail. That's set out clearly. And we think that there are two options. The first option is we defer the review until the outcome of the election. The second option effectively is that the review takes place in January and February. It comes back to Constitution and Governance in March, but we defer any decision making around the outcome of that review until after the elections. That option is our preferred option. So turning effectively to the recommendations, we're recommending that there is a review of IIPP and it is part of the wider governance of the investment programme and Treveth, and that takes place in January and February. But there is input from members in relation to the review, which is set out in the detail of the main body of the report. And that review comes back to March Constitution and Governance, and then that forms part of the consideration of the new administration. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. So hopefully that's clear to members. Our role in this as Constitutional Governance was initially to review the IIPP, but now this has to dovetail, the recommendation is it dovetails into the wider review of the investment programme and Treveth. I don't think we can make conclusions on that. I think the conclusions really are for the next council, but we can certainly do some of the work and perhaps come up with some comments. Resolve to make recommendations, indeed, to the next council when it meets. John Wood is the chairman of the IIPP. Would you like to comment, John, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I support this paper, and I think there is a lot of good things to come out of a review. It has been, because of its nature, the IIPP, very much people have wanted to scrutinise things, and scrutiny is one thing, and political influence obviously has come through, because how money is spent and priorities given will always be political, whether it's a small p or a capital P. That is just a fact of life. People have different opinions of where the priorities should lie. Treveth is moving in a very competitive market, in a very difficult market. Councils are notorious for appearing to be slow, whether this is caution caused by the political influence, obstacles to slow things down. When there is an emergency, as we have seen recently with caution, caution's one thing, reckless spending is another, and emergency spending. As soon as we have political influence, we notice that things get slowed down and get confused. COVID, I think, has been a prime example of that. IIPP, informal, means it's not binding. I think members haven't been aware of that. Investment means you'll be looking for returns, and therefore that's why it's a competitive market, because everybody is looking for where they invest money to get the best return they possibly can. A programme is a scheme of work, and the panel is not able to mandate any changes. So what's the purpose, people say, of the panel? A purpose I see is that they're bringing forward the political influence of ideas that Treveth maybe are wanting to bring forward, where investments are being made. I can give a prime example. In my division, there was talking of a certain investment, and I pointed out that politically it would be unacceptable. And they said, why is that? I said, because you will be poaching jobs from another area of Cornwall, which desperately needs those jobs. And if you actually influence how that factory moves, because Roach Victoria, as you know, is in a very good location, I said, my advice would be to the planning committee, etc. You can't do this, because you'll be taking away maybe 50 or 60 jobs from one town and just plonking them somewhere else. What have you done for Cornwall? You've got to be looking to bring in outside business. And so officers and the developer concerned went away and looked at that in great detail and came to a resolution that actually they would court favours with other companies that were looking to set up in the area rather than poach jobs. So I think that's, to my mind, is where the IIPP is the useful point of it. Trying to act as a scrutiny panel has not been the way forward, because we already have those obstacles in place. If we want to call it that, the right word, obstacle, I think is maybe too strong a language. And so a review of how the IIPP will work in the future, I think, is very important. I think drawing on the experience of the present panel and the present circumstances is also very important. That's why I recommend that we take on this paper in its entirety, because then the new council can hit the ground running rather than having spending a year, maybe 18 months, setting up the new criteria for the IIPP or the guidelines. So I'm in support of this, Chairman, basically, and I'd like to recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you. Very useful, John. Thank you very much indeed. Any comments, Rachel, on what John's just said?
No further comments, Chairman.
OK, brilliant. Thank you. So obviously the IIPP was set up so there was a member's involvement in the investment programme, and that, as John's explained, has to be fleet of foot and rather dynamic in its way it's work. So it's useful to look at it. This was what our remit was. That's English. We were charged with reviewing the IIPP, and I'm determined we will do that before the end of the the end of the council, but of course it is part of this wider work on the investment programme as well. Any comments from members, please? No? Okay, so Councillor Wood has proposed it. Is there a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second it, Chairman.
Okay, sorry, was that David, was that you?
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Smith, thank you very much indeed. So Debbie will now read the recommendations, and these are not recommendations to full council, these are recommendations which we are making to ourselves in a way. Recommendations on page 30, Debbie, and a roll call, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So it has been moved by Councillor Wood and seconded by Councillor Smith that the review of the informal investment programme panel is performed in January and February 2021 as part of a wider review of the governance arrangements around Treveth LLP and its delivery of the investment programme and investment activity. The input to the review of the informal investment programme panel is sought from members of the Audit Committee, Customer and Support Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and Economic Growth and Development Overview and Scrutiny Committee, as well as from members of the Informal Investment Programme Panel, Investment Programme Assurance Group and the Treveth Project Committee. And the third recommendation, the recommendations be presented to the extraordinary meeting of the Constitution and Governance Committee in March 2021 for consideration by the new administration. If I could go for the roll call, please. Councillor Biggs.
4.
Councillor Brown.
4.
Councillor Eddy.
4.
Councillor Smith.
4.
Councillor French.
4.
Councillor Pascoe.
4.
Councillor Pollard.
4.
Councillor Tell.
4.
Councillor Wills.
4.
And Councillor Wood.
4.
Thank you, members. That has been agreed unanimously, Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to Rachel for putting that forward. As there is no other urgent business, as far as I'm concerned, that concludes the meeting. So as we finish at 7 minutes past 11, can I just say a very big thank you to the officers who've worked with us over the last year. Obviously, particularly Mel and Leah and Debbie and who are here this morning, because their work really facilitates exactly what we do. We can't do it without them, and they've been brilliant, frankly. So thank you to them and to Anita, who's not here, of course, as well. Thanks to Martin, the Vice Chair, who hasn't had much to do today. So thank you, Martin, and thanks to the members. A good meeting, efficiently.
You can't thank yourself, John, but I think on behalf of the other members, I think the way you've chaired these meetings has been exemplary, and thank you very much indeed.
Here, here.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much, John, very much indeed. So everybody have a wonderful Christmas, a very peaceful New Year, and hopefully a COVID-free New Year. And I wish everyone all the best. As you can see, there's plenty of work for us still to do right up to the end of the council. So thank you very much, and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, John.
Happy Christmas, everybody. Cheers.
Happy Christmas,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
Okay, go on, Martin, higher.
Bye-bye. There you are. How's that?
Higher.
Can't see it. It's fuzzy.
It says happy Christmas.